Good afternoon. My name is Susie Stern. As chair of the board of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, I'd like to welcome you to today's program. Last night, a remarkable leader gave an inspiring speech addressing the concerns of all Americans. It was a speech without partisanship, vitriol, or mockery, which spoke to the core values that unite the American people, not what divides us. Unfortunately, this speech was not given by our president. It was given by Michigan Senator Halie Soifer, whose 15 minutes of wisdom was preceded by 90 minutes of Donald Trump's lies. The contrast between Senator Slotkin and President Trump last night couldn't have been more stark and epitomizes where we are as a country, divided with very different ideas, leadership, and visions for the future. While this is an unprecedented and alarming time in our nation's history, the good news is we do have the power to fight back. Congressional Democrats are holding firm against a Republican budget that cuts Medicaid to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. The Democrat state attorneys general have worked to successfully block Trump's attacks on birthright citizenship and to stop DOJ's access to the Treasury Department's payment and data systems, and more in the courts. And Democratic voters, including Jewish Dems, are mobilizing across the country, from impassioned town halls to record numbers of calls to Congress, to make our voices heard, and we are not backing down. We thank all of you who have joined us and encourage everyone to join us in doing even more. Today, we are joined by two extraordinary leaders in this fight, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. Our first guest is my senator, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and she has served as New York Senator since 2009, where she has been a leader in defending Jewish and democratic values. Among Senator Gillibrand's many accomplishments includes repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, passing the historic 9/11 health bill, major legislation to give benefits to veterans exposed to toxic burn pits, and the first ever federal law making domestic gun trafficking a crime. And she led reforming the military justice system to work for victims of sexual assault. The senator has been a leading force behind certifying the Equal Rights Amendment, which President Biden ordered enshrined in the Constitution as one of his final acts in office. And Kirsten Gillibrand has fought to protect American voters from election interference. In the Senate, she is a senior member of the Armed Services Committee, ranking member of the Senate Aging Committee, and a member of the Intelligence and Appropriations Committees. As a constituent, I can tell you, Senator Gillibrand is the real deal. I have watched her starting as a volunteer for Hillary Clinton many years ago, to a member of the House of Representatives, to a true leader in the Senate. And in all she does, she is an extraordinary leader who does her homework, constantly reaches out to hear everyone's voices, to really understand what matters to them, and then fights, and I mean fights, for all of us. And so thank you for being here, Senator Gillibrand, and for being a friend of JDCA. I'm going to pass this over to JDCA's CEO, Halie Soifer, to begin today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thank you, Senator Gillibrand and Attorney General Nessel, for joining us. So we'll get right into it. Last night, Donald Trump spent nearly 2 hours talking about his wide-ranging changes that he is imposing without mentioning the very real costs at home and abroad. He mentioned tariffs, he mentioned Ukraine, he mentioned cuts to the federal workforce, but he didn't say a word about the costs to everyday Americans and to our democracy. He also omitted any reference to the 59 hostages still being held in Gaza and those families of hostages who were in the room that night, nor did he mention Iran or the threats facing Israel in the wider region. So, Senator, as someone who was in the room last night, can you describe what it felt like to be there in light of the president's speech? What were the main takeaways, both in terms of what he said, but also what he omitted from that speech?
Well, I was shocked by the things he omitted. The fact that he didn't mention the middle class once was alarming. The fact that he didn't talk about how the cost of groceries are crippling American families. He didn't talk about what he's doing to get costs down. He didn't talk about getting housing costs down. He didn't talk about getting fuel costs down. He also didn't talk about the fact that the tariffs that he wants to put on are not going to be just slightly disruptive. They're going to raise prices on New Yorkers, on average, at least $1,000 a year for people. Food costs are going to go up, housing costs. We get our lumber from Canada. We get a lot of food from Canada and Mexico. Computer equipment, certainly from China. Anything that you buy for your home, if you go to Walmart or Target, almost everything's manufactured in China. So a lot of what he didn't talk about are the top reasons why he actually got elected. That was the messages that a lot of voters ultimately thought he would do more with, because he talked a lot about it on the campaign trail, but he didn't talk about it last night. And then on foreign policy, he really seemed so weak. He didn't talk about what he was going to do to help and stabilize the Middle East, what he was going to do to counter Iran, what he's going to do to get our hostage families home, including a New Yorker. I mean, he did not talk about how he was going to bring the Abrahamic Alliance back online, and what he was going to do to convince Netanyahu to refocus on building a secure future for Israel. He also was weak towards Putin. He has no interest in standing up to Russia. I think that's going to leave a lot of Americans concerned, because they watch what Russia has done over the last few decades. They lived the Cold War. They know what Russian aggression has done to Ukrainians. We have a lot of Ukrainian Americans across New York, across the country. And so he really didn't talk about what a robust leadership in the world looks like. And I think people like our veterans and our active duty service members and people who understand the challenges for Israel didn't hear in his speech what they had hoped.
Definitely. Can I just follow up and ask what it was like in the room? I know.
Sure. You know, I left the speech feeling very disappointed. The purpose of a speech like this is to bring the country together. You're supposed to talk about being a president for everyone. And he just chose to be divisive in a very nasty way. And his speech was probably received well by lots of people. The amazing people he talked about who have great resilience, the young boy who was undergoing cancer treatments, the firefighter from New York. I mean, there was a lot of really feel-good stories, but he didn't use any of those stories to bring the country together. He just wanted applause lines, and I felt like it was so insincere, and it was just a huge disappointment, because he didn't use the opportunity to heal wounds, to bring people together, to show common ground.
So, as Susie noted, there was one great speech last night, and we were incredibly proud of Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin's inspiring response. I wish it were earlier in the evening, so everyone could have seen it. But in case you missed it, she really appealed to all Americans. She talked about common sense policies that would benefit all Americans and spoke to the values that unite, not divide us. Absent from her speech was the mockery and lies and the performative aspects of Donald Trump's speech. But importantly and concisely, she gave a sense of real leadership and direction for this country. So I'm interested in your take on Senator Slotkin's response and what we as Democrats should draw from it.
Well, I personally am very proud of Senator Slotkin. She did an amazing job. And what she did well was she was able to connect with Americans on the issues that they care about. She noted all the ways that Trump and the Republicans are hurting Americans by cutting Medicaid, by firing workers, by literally making it harder for people to get their Social Security payments because those workers have been fired, making it less safe for us to fly to visit our grandparents, even the cuts that harm our veterans. I mean, these are things that she highlighted because these are things we care about, and not serving the people who need us is a huge part of what the federal government's supposed to do. I also appreciated that she could speak from the heartland. She won in a purple-red state of Michigan. Last cycle, the senators who did win were in these purple and red states because they talked about the issues people care about. So Alyssa and Ruben Gallego and Tammy Baldwin and Jackie Rosen all did well to communicate with their voters about what we care about. I liked her three-part call to action. I thought that was really powerful. telling people not to tune out, that you have to understand that what's happening around you matters to your family and that your voice matters in this moment. Asking people to hold their elected leaders accountable, call senators, call Congress members, go to town halls. And when the opportunity comes to vote, to actually vote for people who share your values, and to not forget to organize. Like, we want to create a wave, a blue wave election between now and next November. And the way you do that is expressing how you feel when these important investments are just taken offline just to give tax cuts to Trump's billionaire buddies like Elon Musk. Nobody should be getting access. Elon Musk should not be getting access to all our personal information. And really telling people to be present, get the message out, be part of the solution, I thought was not only powerful, but right on the right spot on. I think it was exactly what people wanted to know, because they want to know, what can I do to help? How can I stop this train wreck of an administration? How can I make sure my values are being heard and remembered?
One of the first major actions that was taken by DOGE under this administration was the shuttering of USAID, an agency responsible for critical humanitarian assistance, health assistance around the world, which was created and could only officially, legally be closed by an act of Congress. Last night, he boasted about closing USAID and freezing nearly all our foreign aid, and really indicated just his willingness to continue to go around Congress, despite the Congress's constitutional authorities. But there are other implications as well for us of the actions that he's taken, including to our national security. So, as a member of the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, can you speak to the national security implications of Donald Trump getting rid of, destroying USAID and severely slashing nearly all of our foreign aid?
Yeah. So, these were a lot of punchlines last night. He was making fun of investments, and these are all bipartisan investments that were made by Lindsey Graham as head of that area of appropriations. A lot of this money is for things that keep us safe. So, Ebola prevention, pandemic prevention, money to stop the spread of AIDS, money to keep countries from devolving into civil war or chaos, money that keeps reduces or fights against terrorism. So these things do matter, and not every American knows why they matter. But when we have a terrorist attack like 9/11, you understand that if you aren't investing in democracy and stability operations in places like Afghanistan or in Iraq, you have terrorism that grows, whether it's ISIS or Al Qaeda or Boko Haram in Africa or other places around the globe. Certainly what we've seen in the Middle East with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. You have to fight terrorism or it does come to your shores. And President Trump just wanted to make fun of things and have punchlines. And so it wasn't a real conversation about how do we invest money to keep us safe, which Democrats are happy to engage in. We don't defend every program. Not everything's perfect. These have been built up over decades on a bipartisan basis. But a serious conversation about what keeps us safer is something that the American people should be able to expect, and one that was absolutely devoid last night. Also, when you don't engage in the world, Russia and China do. And so you lose your ability to create alliances that you will need in protecting America in the instance of a world war, in the instance of a regional conflict where we care about the outcome. And we've always projected power through soft power. That's what the State Department does. It's what a lot of these programs do. It's what even the CIA does and our national security apparatus. So it's just, he dumbs it down. He dumbs it down in a way that doesn't tell the truth, doesn't tell people what's at stake, and makes fun of things that are serious.
Well, speaking of Russia, last week, Donald Trump was clearly doing Vladimir Putin's bidding, including from the Oval Office. He was repeating Russian talking points in the lead up to and during his meeting. Some have called it an ambush with Ukrainian President Zelensky. What did you make of the Zelensky meeting and Trump's remarks about Ukraine last night? And what is your take on the 180-degree change in U.S. foreign policy, whereby we now find ourselves more closely aligned with our adversaries, like Russia, than our allies?
Well, I thought the meeting was a disgrace. I mean, it was harmful, deeply disappointing. It was ineffective on putting America's interests first. It was problematic on so many levels. He didn't reinforce democratic values or the rule of law. He chose to literally step away from America's role as a world and global leader. Both Trump and Vance made fun of an ally, abandoned an ally in real time, an ally who's done everything to fight for their own survival, who have put every available able-bodied person in a war zone to protect their country. Ukrainians have lost hundreds of thousands of people. It is tragic what's happening. And we, as a nation, have always stood by our allies. We haven't backed away from bullies. We don't run away from a fight. But what Trump showed was a weakness, a true weakness, and an appeasement to authoritarianism, to Putin and his oligarchs, to not stand up to them, to not protect American interests. So it was very harmful to our standing in the world. I'm sure our European allies were disgusted. And you send a message to China that says, we aren't going to stand by allies. So if you want to take power, you want to take land, you want to invade Taiwan, yeah, America might not care. It's a terrible message to be sending. We want stability in the globe. We want to tell authoritarians and world bullies that we will stand up to them, and he cowered. And that's not a good look.
So Donald Trump's budget, which he referenced last night and the Republicans are speaking about, but not in incredibly honest or transparent terms, appears to be focused on slashing critical social services, including Medicaid, to fund an extension of their tax cuts, which will benefit billionaires and will effectively strip access to healthcare, food assistance, quality education that tens of millions of Americans rely on. Again, this wasn't clear in the speech, but how are Democrats effectively messaging on this issue, which will impact so many Americans, Democrats and Republicans?
So what the part they're not saying out loud, but is true, is they're going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. Because, for example, when Trump and the Republicans issued their budget last week, one committee is responsible for cutting $880 billion. And in their committee, the only place to cut $880 billion is from Medicare or Medicaid. So they are going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. And we've made that very clear. We've been explaining that to our voters, explaining that to our constituents. In New York, 6 million people rely on Medicaid. They could lose access to their healthcare programs. Medicaid pays for children's healthcare, healthcare for seniors, assisted living facilities, anything for a disability, a person with disabilities. It pays for the walker, it pays for the rails, it pays for literally anything that's a senior or a person with disability needs to actually survive and thrive. And so that they're facing housing insecurity, they're facing healthcare challenges, and that's earth-shattering for these New Yorkers and people across the country. It also demands that they cut funding from things that matter to our older Americans, like nutrition assistance. When we give SNAP dollars, the #1 recipient is a senior. Number 2 and 3 are kids and veterans. These are people who shouldn't have to live hungry because they need our help. It's just horrible. About 3 million New Yorkers, just speaking for our state, they rely on these type of investments. He also didn't talk about the cuts he's made to things like education and our workforce. $330 billion out of education and workforce cuts. That could mean for my state, 38,000 preschoolers enrolled in Head Start will not have access or will have to stay at home or just miss out on early childhood education entirely. It means that a lot of the way we help special needs kids with individualized education plans won't exist. The money for Pell Grants won't be available for kids who might be first-generation kids that want to go to college. We make our society dumber by not investing in the investments that are in the Department of Education. That hurts our economy long-term. It hurts the well-being of our country long-term. So those are the things that he didn't talk about, and that frankly, he's lying to the American people about. And that's what's frustrating, because he's not truthful and he's not direct.
So my final question is, well, you are chairing the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee this year for the 2026 election cycle. And with the midterms just 607 days away, and yes, we're counting, the work really begins now. And we're ready to fight to ensure that Democrats win, take back the House, and if possible, the Senate. We're also involved in elections this year, including in Wisconsin, where the Supreme Court race is just less than a month away. So what can we all be doing to ensure Democratic victories in this year and beyond, and to defend our democracy?
Well, first and foremost, people need to be heard. Doing this podcast is really important. Being heard on the issues you care about, making sure the Trump administration knows you're not happy about cuts to Medicaid. You're not happy about not helping our hostages that are being held by Hamas. Being heard on the absolute disregard for our seniors and our veterans and our kids. Defunding the Department of Education, NIH grants, and all our cancer trials and all the efforts we're making to cure diseases. This is not what certainly voters who voted for Trump signed up for. So being heard is really important. The second thing is taking those opinions, taking those views and organizing around them, making sure your community, your family, your school community, your religious community, your neighborhood understands how you feel and what you're seeing every day, because some people are tuning out. Just like Alyssa said, don't tune out. I know it's a lot. I know it sounds horrible, but just stay focused on what's happening so people know. If we don't speak truth, they won't know what happens. President Trump is a magician when it comes to disinformation, and he lies all the time. And so being a truth teller is vital, and then organizing around that. Next, once we have candidates in our Senate seats, we'll have at least a dozen battleground Senate races across the country. Support candidates, send them money, volunteer for them, lift up their messages, become validators, become people who lift up their campaign issues and their policy fixes. It's a way that Democrats weren't as sophisticated on social media that the Republicans were. So that means being an influencer, being an amplifier, being a validator, being part of these ecosystems so that our voices can be heard and break through on the truth of what's happening. And then as we get our candidates, help the candidates and help organize the get out the vote, making sure people register to vote. Last election cycle, we had a huge registration drive that really mattered. It's why our Senate candidates outperformed the top of the ticket on average by 5%. It's how Alyssa Slotkin won. It's how Jackie Rosen won, and other great candidates around the country. In New York, we had 7 battleground districts. We did our first ever coordinated campaign. We won 5 out of 7. I think we can win the last 2 this cycle. We can create a blue wave if we start building it now. So being part of building the blue wave is really the invitation I have for you. Be part in whatever way you like, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's messaging. All of those things matter. Policy ideas, solutions, cultivating your own ecosystem of communications to be part of the larger effort. That is how we will win. And I believe in blue waves. When I first got elected to Congress, it was in 2006. I won in a 2-to-1 Republican district. But if you remember, that was the midterm election of George W. Bush. He was mired in Iraq. He cut Social Security. There was a culture of corruption in Washington, scandal after scandal. And people wanted access to healthcare as a right, not a privilege. The Democrats that ran on those messages won. It was 30 House seats and 6 Senate seats. I think we can build that blue wave right now. Trump will overreach. He will cut important programs like Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. He's already slashing programs like Meals on Wheels and Head Start. He's not addressing the cost of things like he promised he would, and getting food costs and transportation costs and fuel costs and housing costs down. So I believe, and with the tariffs that are just going to raise costs even more, I believe we'll have strong messages about the cost of things, about cutting important programs and healthcare as a right to people. We can hold them accountable, and that takes millions of people all speaking out on the thing they care about, and that could be you.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. We were created right around this time in Donald Trump's first term and helped with the blue wave of 2018 and subsequent elections. So we're ready to
Yep.
play a
So
part.
we need to build on the 2018 because we didn't flip the Senate. So since I'm doing the DSCC, I want to make sure that we flip the House and the Senate. And to win the Senate, you need to win in red places. And that's why building this ecosystem is the most important thing we can do, and being well funded, and then recruiting the absolute best candidates that really represent their states well.
Absolutely. Well, we all want to be a part of it. We have over 750 people on this call right now. We want to be a part of it. So we will.
Thank you for your leadership, and thanks for the opportunity. And I just want to say hi to Dana. I don't know if she's on the call yet, but I've not seen her in so long, and I look forward to catching up. Hey, Dana, how are
Hi,
you?
Senator. How are you?
So we should talk at a later time. I'm really excited about what's happening in Michigan, and I want to get your thoughts.
I'd love to talk to you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate you being with us, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
To introduce Attorney General Nessel, we are going to turn it over to our Programming Committee Chair, Marcy Orley from Michigan. Marcy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Halie, and thank you, Senator Gillibrand, for joining us today. Our next guest, Dana Nessel, is both a friend and a leader in the fight against Donald Trump's attacks on working Americans. Elected Michigan's Attorney General in 2018, Dana is both the first openly LGBTQ+ person elected statewide in Michigan and the first Jewish person elected as Michigan's Attorney General. In this role, AG Nessel has focused her efforts on consumer protection, criminal justice reform, and voting and civil rights. It is because of AG Nessel that Michiganders are protected from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And after a rise of hate crimes in Michigan for 2 years in a row, AG Nessel launched the first hate crimes unit within the criminal division of the Department of the Attorney General. Prior to becoming the AG, Dana was the lead attorney for the plaintiffs in the case that was the precursor to the landmark ruling in Obergefell versus Hodges, which codified same-sex marriage and granted same-sex couples the right to adopt nationwide. It has been my privilege to know and to have supported Dana over these many years. And as a Michigan Jewish Democrat, I am so proud that Dana is representing our values in the work she does every day. Dana, thank you so much for joining us today. I will now pass things back over to Halie to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Marcy. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Marcy. Well, we're thrilled to have you with us, and we will just get into it. I know everybody wants to hear your take. So over the past month, Donald Trump has issued an unprecedented number of executive orders, expanding executive power, effectively removing checks and balances, usurping the power of Congress, and undermining the independence of key arms of the executive branch. Many of the administration's actions have been challenged in the courts. Some have been frozen, though the administration is, at times, it appears potentially defying some of these court orders. So we'd like your take on what exactly is happening in terms of the legal perspective of this, and can we rely on the courts when there's no clear enforcement mechanism? And then finally, whether or not you believe we are in or headed toward a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, those are some heavy questions to deal with for sure. So what I can say is this, when I ran for this office initially in 2018, it was really in large part because I was so horrified at the trespasses of the federal government by Donald Trump and his administration. And I really saw that the Democratic AGs were having great success in combating some of his worst policies. And we filed dozens and dozens of lawsuits we won about 86% of those lawsuits. And that was great in that we stopped really many of the worst policies that were being promulgated by the administration from ever taking effect. Sometimes we won it outright, and sometimes we just delayed those policies ever taking effect. And by the time Joe Biden got into office, he was able to repeal those policies and moot out those cases. So, I was really proud to be part of that effort. Did not see myself when I ran for re-election in 2022, spending my last 2 years of office the same way as I spent my first 2 years. We have term limits here in Michigan, so that it will be my last 2 years in office. And I sometimes think, like, were we too successful? Maybe because, people didn't know perhaps just how bad the policies of the Trump administration 1.0 were, because so much of it never happened, right? So many things he tried to do got stopped in the courts. And so the courts really held up. They were sort of the stopgap when you look at, horrific violations of the Constitution, of federal law, of the Administrative Procedures Act, and so many other things from happening. And I would say that the courts largely worked. So here we are, Trump 2.0, and he's being even more aggressive, and like right out of the gate, right? One of the first executive orders was to eliminate birthright citizenship. And like, when I talk about this being a bold move, I mean, it's right in the Constitution. It's a constitutional amendment. It's in the 14th Amendment in black and white. There's no like, how do you interpret that? I mean, it's been part of our Constitution for over 125 years. There's been 2 Supreme Court cases that have upheld it expressly. And yet, boom, he thinks he can take his, magic Sharpie and, undo a constitutional amendment, which is a very, very difficult thing to do. So, we've been challenging the Trump administration over and over again. The AGs and also the many other parties that have sued have been largely successful in obtaining temporary restraining orders or preliminary injunctions, oftentimes nationwide, so that a lot of the worst policies haven't gone into effect. But of course, that has not stopped the Trump administration from trying, and it hasn't stopped them, in some cases, from violating the court's orders. And we just had to file, actually, I believe it was yesterday, a second motion to enforce in our case involving the Office of Management and Budget, where you'll remember a memo went out, I think it was a Tuesday night, basically saying that they were going to stop funding, they were going to pause funding on critical programs to the states. And I mean critical, I mean all of Medicaid and Head Start and Meals on Wheels and the FEMA programs that go out to the states. And, I could go on and on. Boom, in the morning, those funds were all frozen. I mean, billions and billions of dollars. Again, this is money that is appropriated through Congress. And it's money, like, we paid our taxes in Michigan. We paid over $30 billion in taxes. It goes to the federal government, comes back to us in the way of this programming. And sua sponte, decided, I'm just going to cut all this funding off. So we were able to get a temporary restraining order immediately after filing. And it was all 23 attorneys general, Democratic attorneys general, that filed within 24 hours of that happening. But they have repeatedly violated the order. And I would say in many of these cases, the Department of Justice has just outright lied to the courts. And the courts recognize it and will try to remind the attorneys to be truthful when they speak to the court or when they file pleadings with the court, which is an odd thing to see a federal judge have to remind the Department of Justice to do. So, so far, for the most part, we've had compliance. Again, there are some programs where the funding has still been cut off on that particular case. But, will we, so when you ask, are we in a constitutional crisis? My answer to you, my reply is not yet, but TBD. And the reason I say that is because over and over again, here we have seen Trump and Musk and Vance put out social media posts or just say outright, that judges that rule against the administration should be impeached or removed from office. Or you've heard Donald Trump say, like, only he is the law. And I'm like, oh, did you forget that there are 3 branches of government? Because last I checked, there still were, even if Congress doesn't seem to be exerting their authority very much. The courts still exist, and Marbury v. Madison, was a decision that was issued in 1803 that said the executive is beholden to scrutiny by the federal judiciary. So I guess the biggest question is on all these cases is, will the Trump administration ultimately defy court orders? And if so, then what do we do? And the issue with that is that when you file a motion for contempt or a show cause hearing, which precedes that, you expect that somebody from the government, maybe it's a secretary, a cabinet official, maybe it is a director of an agency, who is show cause to come in. Maybe it's Elon Musk, depending on the circumstances. You count on them, complying with a subpoena, and if they don't, you have the U.S. Marshals, the federal marshals, go out and bring the person to court. But the problem is that we never anticipated, firstly, that a federal official just wouldn't comply with a court order. Secondly, that they wouldn't comply with the subpoena. But third, that the U.S. Marshals would just say, we're not going to even go out to get them in the first place, because the federal marshals are under, you guessed it, the executive branch. So none of that has happened so far. Our hope is that it won't ever happen. But if it does, we're going to be dealing with a new set of circumstances that we've never seen before. Do we have some strategies to anticipate how we'll deal with that? We do, but who knows how it's going to work? There's a lot of brave new world circumstances here that we've never seen before. So we're not in a constitutional crisis as of today. Will we be tomorrow? Perhaps. I think it's only a matter of time before the Trump administration decides to test the courts and see how far they can go.
Well, speaking of Elon, Trump lauded Doge in his speech last night, which has not only threatened our security by acquiring our sensitive financial information for nearly all Americans, but Doge has also recklessly slashed critical funding and whole arms of the U.S. government, decimating USAID and intending to continue this drumbeat of slashing arms of the government. What are you working with attorney generals around the country to counter these huge budget cuts and cuts to the federal government? And what does it mean for Michigan?
Yeah, well, it's devastating for Michigan, but it's devastating for every state. So we're not an outlier when it comes to that, right? Losing critical programs, thousands of federal employees that do the work to administer these programs, that are absolutely essential members of government. So it's very harmful. There's no question about it. When you say, what are we doing? Well, we filed a lawsuit, and actually, Michigan led a case against Elon Musk and Donald Trump that was filed in the D.C. District Court, as well as with our colleague states of Arizona and New Mexico, and then many others that joined in with that. And our pitch to the judge was essentially, this is a flagrant violation of not just, that there's a separation of powers issue, but something called the Appointments Clause. And what that means is that if you are going to have an individual that is making cabinet level decisions for an agency, right? Terminating government contracts, selling off government property, and firing government workers, that you should have been appropriately appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. And of course, these things didn't happen. Elon Musk was never confirmed by a single senator, let alone a majority of senators. So he's not just acting like a cabinet secretary, right? He's acting like a super cabinet secretary. It's not just that he has decision-making authority over, one agency or one federal department of government, but all of them. So what the judge said to us in the case basically is she said, we're likely to win that case, but she did not grant a TRO in the case. We're still hoping that she'll grant a preliminary injunction soon. But essentially what she said is like, there are all these harms that you listed that are going to come to your state, but they just haven't happened yet. And, we brought up all kinds of examples of the harm. And I'm going to say this, right? One of the things that we were most worried about is things that happen in the Department of Treasury. And there are different cases just pertaining to that, because what we've said is it's not just that you have to try to put everything back together, right? Like rehire those workers that you illegally fired, and, continue funding on government contracts. And also take all of the data that you have essentially stolen, in my opinion, and delete it. I wonder if it's too late, if all that information was really fed, as we are led to believe from news reports, into, unsecured servers, and AI has used it. Is it too late? And I will say this, like I just had a couple of things happen to me in the last 24 hours that tells me that my identity has been stolen. Somebody tried to purchase property in my name today. And then yesterday I found out that there were some businesses that were formed in my name using my information, and I got forms from the IRS. And good news is apparently I own some sort of a delicious food company. I'm a terrible cook, so that was news to me, but hooray. But I'm probably going to owe some taxes for money somebody else made. Now, did all that happen because, Elon Musk has my social security number and my banking information and all the other information that you would need in order to do these things? I don't know if that's a coincidence. Doesn't feel like a coincidence, but who knows? So the thing is the judge said, well, you have to demonstrate, that these harms, you have demonstrated they're going to occur, they're likely to occur, but they haven't occurred yet. And of course, my argument was like, okay, that's like I have cases against serial rapists, and I can show that somebody, by a probable cause standard, may have committed 5 or 6 sexual assaults. I don't know exactly who they're going to attack next. I don't know those victims' names or where they live or what their addresses are, but I know that likely it's going to happen. And I really would make that comparison to what Doge is doing. It's so dangerous. I don't know what department they're going into next. I don't know what agency they're going in next, but I do know that they're going to be harmful to my state in terms of the actions that they're taking. So I think we're going to win that case. The question is going to be, how do you put all the pieces of the puzzle back together again? If Humpty Dumpty fell off a wall, like how do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Humpty Dumpty apparently in this scenario being the federal government. It's going to be really, really difficult to do. And many of these things, honestly, if Congress wanted to do these things, there is a legal way that you could eliminate the, Department of Education or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but they would never get enough votes. And Trump isn't even trying, and he's not even interested in trying, because he just thinks that he can do everything with his magic Sharpie. And he doesn't really need to use the legal mechanisms that are available to him. But we are trying, we are doing the best that we possibly can. We know how injurious this is to every state in the union and all of this critical programming, all of these critical workers, and all the good work that the federal government does. Is there waste? Yeah, of course there is. And there are surgical ways that you can identify that waste and remove it in specific instances. But this chainsaw approach, I can't say that it's doing anything but really destroying the United States by destroying our federal government. So we're going to keep working. We're going to keep on filing lawsuits. I think we have another one coming tomorrow that is related to what we're talking about. As attorneys general, I can tell you the Democratic AGs are determined to keep on doing anything we possibly can to protect our state residents. But under these circumstances, it's a challenge, but we're working very hard at it.
As Trump reminded us last night, he and other MAGA Republicans are proud of their efforts to threaten equality, erase the trans community or attempt to erase the trans community and demonize the LGBTQ plus community. As both the state's attorney general and as a proud member of this community, what is taking place in Michigan on these issues, and what can we all do to fight back and support equality measures such as marriage equality, which has been well established in this country for more than a decade?
Yeah, I mean, we knew this was going to happen, right? This isn't a surprise. During the campaign, they really went after trans people, and we knew eventually it would go to all LGBTQ people and frankly, all marginalized communities, right? And again, this is something that I especially think it's important that the Jewish community be cognizant of. Like, okay, great, this time it's not starting with us, but it's going to get there, as it always does. And what we saw, of course, is the demonization, in particular, of immigrant communities, of trans people, and going after DEI, which is just a code word for going after Black and brown people, going after women, but in Michigan, where we are right now, as we're the same as 35 other states that have. You remember in 2004. One of the strategies by George W. Bush for reelection was that they were going to drive people out to the polls by putting these marriage bans into the Constitution in all these states. And it worked in 35 states, including in Michigan. So the only thing that makes marriage equality legal in states like mine and all those other many states is the fact that we have the Obergefell v. Hodges decision, and which basically says that there is a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. But if Obergefell is overturned, then that goes away. And what we're left with is a 2022 act that was passed and signed by Biden, which is the Respect for Marriage Act. And it doesn't legalize same-sex marriage, which would have been great if they would have been able to do it, then we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. But what it does is it provides for full faith and recognition of out-of-state marriages. So here's what would happen. If Obergefell v. Hodges is overturned, and I know that there are challenges right now that are in the courts where they're hoping, just like Dobbs, they're putting it out there so it'll get smacked down in these cases in district court. They'll get smacked down in the courts of appeals. But then they're hoping the Supreme Court is like, oh, I guess we were wrong about Obergefell, and we're now going to retract and overturn our previous decision. If that happens, states like mine, same-sex marriage, first of all, the people who are already married, generally speaking, you're grandfathered in. That's how it's worked traditionally in the past, and that's how it worked with the Prop 8 case out in California. The people who had already been married when Prop 8 passed, they stayed married, or at least their marriages were recognized by law, but no new marriages, no new same-sex marriages would occur in states like mine and so many of these other states, meaning the clerks for the counties would not be able to provide or issue marriage licenses. But you could go to one of the states where same-sex marriage is legal, get married there, come back to your home state and have your marriage recognized because of the Respect for Marriage Act. What I'm worried about beyond Obergefell being overturned is really just sort of the diminishing of how you can treat opposite sex couples versus same-sex couples. And so I think that's what we're likely to see is they're going to water down the rights of same-sex couples, and they're going to use religious freedom as a way to do that. And so they'll say like, oh, if you're a clerk and you object on a religious basis to marrying a same-sex couple, you don't have to do it. Or if you are a company and you provide health insurance to your employees, but you object to same-sex marriage, you only have to provide health insurance to the opposite sex married couples. So, I see things like that happening so far in the courts, like a lot of these DEI measures, like for instance, it's just a bunch of gobbledygook. It doesn't really, like, again, you can't circumvent federal law or state law using an executive order. It just doesn't work that way. You know, it's more like a policy statement. And so as a result, the courts have been saying, like, no, you can't stop, you know, federal funding of educational institutions or medical centers because they're doing something that you don't like when there is a state law or a federal law that makes it legal or insists that they provide that medical care or their education or whatever. But, you know, I mean, this is the whole point, right? Is to try to challenge things in the courts and to hope that you get favorable court rulings down the line, knowing that they're going to lose in these initial phases. And so far they have been. But is it a scary time to be a member of the LGBTQ community or to be, you know, in a family of somebody who is LGBTQ? Yeah, it's real scary. And, you know, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
You know, following up on how you started to answer that question, it was interesting. You referenced also Jewish Americans, and of course, we are not immune to the threats from this administration. You know, Donald Trump's first act as president was pardoning, commuting the sentences of, and releasing from jail nearly 1,600 insurrectionists, including the head of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, some of whom are based in Michigan. Recognizing, as you do, the dangerous and hateful agendas of these militias, which include white supremacists and anti-Semites, how is Donald Trump's alignment with these extremists a danger to Jewish Americans?
Well, listen, you can't. All right. So it's the first day of the Trump administration, and Elon Musk is giving a speech at one of his official Trump's official inaugural events. And what does Elon Musk do? The Sig Heil salute, not once but twice. And you know, and then there just shortly thereafter is Musk and JD Vance appealing to voters in Germany to you know, elect or at least to elect as many members of parliament of the ADF, the far right wing, I guess the closest thing we had to the Nazi party that they've had in Germany, into office. And I mean, are we supposed to just pretend that that stuff isn't happening? I mean, it's right out there. And I think that largely what Trump has done is he's said, like, well, I support Israel, so that's all you need, Jews. You're welcome. And I don't subscribe to that philosophy at all. If you support white supremacists, if you support Nazis, if you support hate groups that hate Jews, you might be a Nazi. So he is just an incredible threat to the Jewish community, irrespective of whatever his relationship is with Benjamin Netanyahu. And what we've been doing in Michigan, you know, it's the in Marcy's intro, she talked about my hate crimes unit. Well, it's hate crimes and domestic terrorism. That's the name of the unit. So we go after people who perpetrate hate crimes, but also these domestic terrorism you know, organizations. And we've had some very successful prosecutions. You might remember one of those militia groups actually had a plot to kidnap and assassinate our governor, Gretchen Whitmer. But we've had many other prosecutions as well. The thing that probably a lot of people don't know is that, you know, for instance, in Michigan, we're very fortunate that we have laws that strictly prohibit domestic terrorism. But you know who doesn't? The federal government. The feds only have laws that prescribe, you know, foreign terrorists and foreign terrorism, not domestic terrorism, which is pretty scary because domestic terrorism is more of a threat to us right now than foreign terrorism is. So, you know, we go after those cases hard, but the problem, and this is a big problem, is who are our partners in doing that? The FBI. The FBI works with us. And so we have some very, very scary organizations that we've taken down. One was named The Base, and they're a white supremacy organization. They had the uniforms and the manual and the trainings with with armaments, and they had basically taken over an area in the thumb of area of Michigan. And, you know, before they blew up a synagogue or you know, a church or a mosque or a 4th of July parade, we managed to take them down. And those members now, they're taking a time out in the Michigan Department of Corrections, right? But we needed that help of the FBI in terms of pursuing that case. And it makes me really nervous, the fact that I don't know that we're going to have those partnerships anymore. And it's going to be very difficult to do it without the federal partners there. But I mean, let's make no mistake about it, right? This is a president that supports anti-Semitism. And I don't care that he's got, you know, a Jewish son-in-law, you know, and I don't care that the Adelson family gives him bazillions of dollars. He is an anti-Semitic apologist and supporter. And we should not expect to be immune from what we're going to see from this presidency. And I would say this, since we're talking about it, we have to be very cognizant of anti-Semitism on the right. It is there, it is pervasive, it is scary, but we see it on the left as well. And that's been a rude awakening, I know, for me in Michigan. But we have to call it out wherever we see it. That's the thing, right? We can't remain silent about it. It is literally the very worst thing that we could do. And so we have to be loud and we have to be vocal and we have to make sure that people see it and understand when it's happening and that we don't tolerate it.
Well, thank you so much. My final question that I always ask our speakers, and I really want to ask you, but we're short on time, so I'm hoping you can do it in a minute, and I'll keep it short, is what gives you hope? These are incredibly dark times, and we're all looking to the next election, which is in 607 days. But you know, what gives you hope, and are you hopeful about upcoming elections?
Here's my problem. I can't even start thinking about 2026 when we're in this really difficult place in 2025. And I think it's actually a little bit dangerous for us to just be like, we're going to recruit great candidates for 2026. And I'm just not at a point right now where I'm like, yes, we're going to have regular, normal, free and fair elections next year. And I say that because look at all the cybersecurity experts that, you know, one of the first things Trump did when he took office was to remove those cybersecurity experts that work with our secretaries of state to make sure that there's not foreign interference with our elections, and this effort to pass the SAVE Act, right, which would disenfranchise like a third of all women voters, and so many other things, right? So I want to focus first on like, what do we do right now to make sure that we still have free and fair elections next year? And what should we focus on in the time being? And listen, I will say this again, as a you know, as a Jewish American, our people have gotten through incredible things in the past. I mean, we're only here because of the wherewithal that we've had in circumstances that, you know, it's a miracle. It's just an absolute miracle that we still have people that call themselves Jews in the world after, I mean, all of our holidays are basically like somebody tried to kill us, but we survived. We should eat something really delicious. I mean, let's face it, right? That's who we are. And I think about, you know, how I even ended up being here in the United States or even alive as a person at all. And it was because of the incredible determination of my grandparents and so many other people that allowed us as a people to survive it all. So I have to say, like, we've been through some stuff before. And I think that many of us, like, we grew up with this never again mentality. Let's recognize it when we see really terrible things that are happening, and let's know to fight back against it. And let's not wait until it's too late to do so. So what I say right now for everybody is, I know it's really easy to turn off the news and to say, like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm just going to watch 90 Day Fiance on TLC because it makes me feel good about my life choices. Or maybe I'll watch some reruns of Real Housewives because somebody's going to throw wine in somebody's face. And I'm like, oh my God, did you just see that? That was crazy. We have to see what's happening. We have to watch it. We have to pay attention and we have to speak out and we have to spend all of our spare time. Literally, there's nothing more important that we could be doing than trying to preserve our democracy right now. And that means going to every protest. It means contacting our electeds over and over and over. It means forming organizations or participating in these organizations. Like, we don't have time to do anything else. We don't have time to look away because this great experiment of American democracy could literally be over in months if we are not working really, really hard to like take every person that we know that either, is not very politically active or people who identify as they're Republicans. Maybe they were even Trump voters and say, wake up, look what's happening. Don't you see how damaging this is? Don't you see how this is destroying our country? We have to speak up and we have to get Republicans that are in power right now to finally grow a spine and to say, we can't put up with this anymore. As Democrats, yes, we are deeply vested in this and we are going to fight back, but we need Republicans to do the right thing at long last as well. And it's time for us to take, every measure of strength that we have and to make sure that we are doing this every day, all day, full time, because pretty soon if we don't, it's going to be too late. And I know that's not the hopeful message that you were hoping for right now, but it's the realistic one. And if I'm known for anything, it's not bullshitting people. These are dire times, and we have to be very, very focused on being alert, paying attention, and 24/7 fighting back.
Well, we really appreciate your candor, your honesty, your moral leadership in Michigan. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and thank you for your voice. We loved hearing from you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. To close us out tonight, we will hear from Bobby Saferstein, our Senior Program Director. Bobby.
Hi, Halie, and thank you. I'm Bobby Saferstein, JDCA's Chief Program Officer, and I want to thank my Senator, Kirsten Gillibrand, Michigan Attorney General Nessel, and each of you for joining us today and for all of the work you've been doing in partnership with JDCA to defend our democracy. As we've heard today, we're not powerless in this fight, and here are 3 actions we can all take right now. 1, please join JDCA every Monday night until April 1st as we phone bank on behalf of Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate, Judge Susan Crawford. As one of the first real tests of President Trump's so-called electoral mandate, winning a liberal majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race is essential and will send a clear message that Americans do in fact reject MAGA extremists and the Project 2025 roadmap. To put a finer point on this, after retaking the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 2023, liberal justices restored voting rights. They installed fair election maps for the first time in more than a decade. They protected abortion rights and are on the verge of restoring rights for unions and teachers. But this all goes away if we lose and don't elect Judge Crawford. So please click on the link in the chat and join us every Monday night. 2, please join JDCA in telling Congress that you oppose GOP cuts to critical programs. The current Republican budget resolution calls for cuts to Medicaid and other life-saving services so that they can pay for their $4.5 trillion in tax cuts for billionaires. We must ensure Congress protects all of us, not just President Trump's friends. To sign our petition, please click on the link in the chat. And 3, if you're not yet a JDCA member, please consider becoming one or increasing your membership level to support our work. JDCA members receive exclusive benefits such as members-only programs with leading experts. Our next conversation on Wednesday, March 19th will feature political strategist and founder of the Hopium Chronicles, Simon Rosenberg. You don't want to miss it, so please click on the link in the chat and become a member today. As we close today's program, we're reminded by what Senator Slotkin said last night, that there truly is more that unites us than divides us. And we forget this at our own peril. So as we continue to fight for our rights, our values, our country, and we must, so too must we appeal to the better angels of our nature. Thank you for joining JDCA today. We'll see you again soon.